with our Marvel UK panel. We've got two fantastic guests lined up here, possibly, well, the best two people to talk about Marvel UK. I'm just going to slightly indulge myself for a moment because the first autumn assembly that I ever attended, these two gentlemen were the guests of honour, and you can imagine a very young, wide-eyed David Wallace meeting Andrew Wildman and Simon Furman for the first time. In fact, if any of you have got the Megradome DVDs, you might find a really terribly mulleted David Wallace asking Simon Furman probably the geekiest question that you've ever seen in your life. It very much was in issue 25. But fortunately, he hasn't held it against us, I don't think. But they're here to talk to you about the Marvel days and all of the great things that came out of it. So, put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Mr. Simon Furman and Mr. Andrew Wildman. So, how are you?
Oh, yeah, very well.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah, we're straining our memories here to go back to Marvel UK days, but you know, we'll do our best.
If we don't know the answer to any of your questions or anything like that, we'll just make it up anyway. So.
Yeah, we'll have some runners knocking around with microphones, so if you do have any questions over the course of the panel, just stick your hand up and we'll get to you. But first of all, I'm going to kick things off. So, let's go right back to the beginning. Why don't you give us a brief introduction of how things came about for you both?
Yeah, I mean, taking you right back, Marvel UK, which had sort of up to that point pretty much been a reprint place. You know, I mean, they had some original material with Captain Britain, they'd had Night Raven and a few others. But really, kind of when I came on board, they were really starting to get into licensed comics, and Transformers was one of the first they took on, you know, after Doctor Who. And I was just brought in because they hadn't got enough American material to reprint. They were reprinting the initial 4 issues or 5 issues or whatever was out at the time, but they could quickly see, even as a fortnightly, there wouldn't be enough American material to sustain the comic, and it was doing well enough for them that they thought they wanted to keep it going on a fortnightly and then a weekly basis. So they bought, first of all, they bought Steve Parkhouse in to write a story called Man of Iron, which was a mixture of colour and black and white, and you know, was kind of quite a step out of the continuity of what the Americans were doing, just because at that point they really didn't kind of want to sort of tread on the toes of what the American comic was doing. So what Steve did was a very kind of uniquely British take on Transformers with Man of Iron. And then I was contacted by a guy called Ian Rimmer, who I'd worked with at IPC, who had become an editor over at Marvel, and he introduced me to Sheila Cranner, who was the editor of Transformers UK, and I was asked, I'd done very little scripting at the time, but Ian kind of liked what I'd done for Scream, a little horror comic, and he introduced me to Sheila. Sheila really was kind of, you know, in need of writers at the time to generate material, and we really didn't have much to go on except, you know, the original mini-series and, well, very little else at the time. So we just had to spin stories out of that and the text specs from the toys. And I came up with a story called The Enemy Within, which was a Starscream and Brawn story. And all those ones were quite character-focused, just because we couldn't use the big guns like Optimus Prime and Megatron so much. Because again, we didn't know where the American stories were going with them. So they tended to be little character pieces to start off with. And just gradually as we went along and we became more confident in what we were doing and didn't quite care as much what the Americans thought, we started to branch out in bigger directions and start to do kind of stories that had a kind of integrity and meat to them of their own. And when we got as far as the Transformers the animated movie, we just took off in a completely different direction and used the movie cast, which we knew the Americans weren't using.
So, I've got a question. So Mr. Furman, did Marvel US give you any kind of direction at all? Did they just let you do what you want and then have to oversee it afterwards? Or?
There wasn't much direction from Marvel US. We would occasionally get scripts or just photocopies of issues that hadn't actually been printed yet, so we would have an idea where they were going. But as it went along and they got closer and closer to their deadlines, we knew less and less about what was coming up. So we went through this whole process always of trying to leave wherever we left off with the American stories. We would craft our UK stories to leave them the characters pretty much back where they started.
Which is the old way of doing comics anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. So we just had to make sure all the toys we borrowed were back in the box for the next chunk of American stories. But you know, we did start to sort of, like I say, just deviate from what, you know, strictly what the Americans were doing, and they'd start to take a few, I guess, liberties. And when they kind of did, when a character just dropped off their radar. Because often, you know, to Bob Williams' credit, he had an awful lot of characters to introduce. So sometimes characters would just get completely sidelined very quickly or just drop off the grid. And that was great for us because it meant we could just jump in with stories. And at one point the Dinobots just disappear out of the American story, and I think we did about sort of 10 Dinobot stories until they reappeared. So, you know, we were always looking for any opportunity, any characters that the Americans weren't using.
So that was the start of your love affair with Grimlock then?
Yeah, it was. And again, we took a liberty with Grimlock because we didn't do him exactly as the Americans did. You know, they had this, you know, he was one step up from the kind of dumb character in the cartoons, in the American comics. But I still kind of didn't think there was enough character for me there, so I tried to build more into Grimlock and make it that the rest was just a kind of facade. And so, you know, without kind of straying completely away, we tried to kind of add to the characters of it as well.
Yeah, so I've told this story many times. I hope when I tell it now it'll be exactly the same as it was last time I told this story. My kind of introduction to Marvel UK was through somebody that I've been at college with who became an editor there. And he asked me, well I probably asked him actually, I said, can I do some work for Marvel UK? And he said, okay, we'll do a 2-page kind of tryout, if you like, for Thundercats. I've got a feeling that was the first thing I did. So I did a 2-page Thundercats. And they really liked what I did, which was great. So then I started doing Thundercats strip work. And most of it I would post in. I didn't very often take it into the office in London. But occasionally I would. So I went in and took it to the editor, Steve White, to give him my latest Thundercats stuff. And then the person sitting at the desk next to Steve said, obviously thought the work I was doing was absolutely amazing. And he said, do you want to do some Transformers? And I was like, I don't know, what is a Transformers? I have no idea what that is. So it's like, well, it's like robots, look, like this. And I'm like, well, okay, not really. But I didn't say not really. Inside I was saying not really. I don't want to draw robots, I want to draw superheroes. I don't want to draw Marvel UK, I want to draw Marvel US superheroes. And Thundercats was always the closest thing to superheroes that Marvel UK had. But I was a young freelancer, so I would say yes to everything. Well, everything that paid money. Well, not everything that paid money, but...
and nothing's changed.
No, I'm just older. But, so that person in the desk next to Steve White was Furman. And so that was the beginning of me doing some Transformers stuff, which I think was some cover artwork, and then I did an annual or something.
I mean, normally, by this point I was both editing and writing for the comic, which is another little story I'll tell you in a minute. But I was editing Transformers and somebody else was looking at my script so that I wasn't just in total control of everything. But normally what we did with new artists was we trialled them on the covers first. So all the artists like Lee Sullivan, Robin Smith, they all started on the covers first and then graduated to interiors once we were, you know, they were comfortable with it and we were comfortable with what they were doing. So, you know.
It seems like in some, I mean, it's the obvious thing to do to kind of get an artist to cut his teeth by doing one single illustration as a cover, but at the same time it's slightly odd because the cover is the thing that's going to be seen in the newsagents. So to have like a new, fresh artist on the thing that's seen before any of the interiors is kind of slightly odd as well. So there's a lot of pressure on you as a young artist to do your best work. But then that's a good thing because it challenges you, it really pushes you. And I have no clue who these characters were that I was drawing. I think one of the first ones, I think it was Soundwave, that was one of the first. I didn't know who he was. I thought it was Optimus Prime. But it was great, yes, I enjoyed doing the covers, and then the opportunity to do interior art was great because you feel as though your career has got kick-started. And little did I know how that would then lead on to working for the US market. But there were some great people at that time. When you kind of think back, working for Marvel UK, so Lee Simon, Jeff Senior, like David Braithwaite, some of these people who
Brian Hitch.
I mean,
these guys have gone on Barry Kitson, Neil Simpson, who's doing Game of Thrones stuff now, It really was a kind of roster of artists who've gone on to greater things.
Yeah, and then there's me.
So, the other little story was that in the interim, I joined Marvel UK on staff. They're working on Captain Britain Monthly, as well as writing freelance for Transformers. And then they gave me Thundercats to edit, which I was really pleased because it was my first editorial job. And really, I didn't want to then go and edit Transformers, but when Ian Rimmer left staff, I was kind of the obvious choice to become editor. And I just kind of got the first few issues of Thundercats out, so I was quite actually disappointed to have to kind of go back into the Transformers office. And then it created this problem of I was writing and editing the title, which Marvel frowned upon generally. So Richard Starkins would script edit my scripts, and that, was kind of how we sort of got around that. But yeah, it was, by the end I was just kind of, it was Transformers everything,
That's when he became Mr. Transformers.
So, when you started working on it, both of you, what source material were you drawing from? I mean, Bob Yansky was writing the US comics, so were you getting his bios through? And Andrew, what artwork were you using to reference the characters that you were drawing?
The art reference pretty much boiled down to looking at what other people had already drawn. And then loads of model sheets, which I think were from the movie,
from the animated series, I think. We had eventually we got all the character turnarounds from the TV show, which are just sort of front, back, and side shots, done line work, and that was so much better than what we had originally, which was only really the pack art or the toys themselves. So you'll see at one point in Marvel UK storytelling that it goes from artists drawing from the toys to artists drawing from the animated model sheets. And it literally happens in the first two parts of Target 2006. So Galvatron, when he first turns up in Target 2006, is the toy, and then suddenly he was the movie model sheet in the next episode.
I never got any toys.
Right, we've also got some runners as well knocking around at either side of the hall, so if you have any questions, just stick your hand up. We've already got some.
Yeah, questions, come on.
This is a patient solving. In the next page, issue 170, it says that Jeff Senior went on supplies to promote stores. What was that on? According to one of the letters pages, you and Jeff Senior went on supplies to promote Dragon's Balls. What was it like being on supplies?
Jeff was one of the sort of the one of my favourite artists to work with on Transformers anyway. So, you know, I mean, it was great to sort of, when we hit that stage in Marvel UK where we were going to sort of do American format comics. You know, uppermost in our mind was getting Jeff moved off Transformers and onto one of those. So, you know, we very much used all the other Marvel UK titles to springboard the launch of Dragon's Claws, or Dragon's Teeth as it was originally. And in fact, as it was advertised, Jeff, it was always the idea to get Jeff onto, something we thought showcased his talents even more than Transformers was doing. And the good thing with Marvel UK is everything got cross-promoted and flagged up in all the other titles. So I think we did a little sort of one-page how sad that we got Jeff to draw all that. And it was very much, that was the stage where we just Jeff really left Transformers behind for a while. Does that actually answer your question? I'm not totally sure. Yeah.
Close enough. It's all made up anyway.
We've got somebody over here.
As David said earlier, you two are pretty much the godfathers of Transformers. I've got two questions, and without wanting to sound like a real fanboy, thanks for what you've done over the years.
Unleash the fanboy.
Absolutely. First of all, Regeneration 1, and you said that was the end for Transformers for the two of you. Is this, I know you said it in the past, anymore?
Never ends.
Never. It was what Regeneration 1 was really was the end of that story. I mean, I doubt it's not the end of my involvement with Transformers. I'm always happy to do more. But right now, my career and Andrew's career I think we've just got sort of taken different directions. And I'm doing a lot more screenwriting, which is something I want to keep the momentum going with. So, at the moment, there's just no room really for Transformers. But ultimately, there will always be kind of, a chance for me to return to it, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Regen was great because it was an opportunity to, not just in a story sense, tie up loose ends, because that's more kind of Simon's thing, but just as an artist, it kind of felt incomplete before as an artist, even though, I've done many, many other things. And then I always felt like a bit of a fraud coming to all these conventions, because I wasn't involved in Transformers anymore. So it was nice to have a second bite of doing Transformers stuff, but on something that was, no kidding, a conclusion to the work that we'd done before. So it was very complete in that sense. I don't know an awful lot about, and subsequently don't have much particular affection for all the new versions of Transformers. Not because I don't like it, but just because I haven't had any involvement with it. But G1 I did, because it launched my career, so I have a lot of affection for it. And so it was nice to really round that off in a very, very complete way. I don't think I'll ever do any Transformers anymore. I'm doing this sketchbook thing. Has anybody? Raymond's nodding his head. Yeah, I'm doing this sketchbook challenge thing that I set myself. I think Simon probably doesn't even know about this. Because Simon is not on social media. So, no, I set myself a challenge. I was doing so many sketches. People were asking me to do sketches, emailing me, can you do a sketch of this, whatever. So I started to do all these things. I set up a Patreon page so that people could have an invested interest in what I was doing around kind of Transformers sketches, and also some canvases. I'm doing some large format canvases for an exhibition. But then the sketch thing, I thought, I've done so many of these, they ought to be in a book. I just do them and then go. So I started to scan them in, and then I announced that I was going to do a sketch of every single Transformers character that appeared in the original Marvel G1 universe book. Well, that unleashed a bloody nightmare, didn't it? So people were saying, so how many is that then? I'm like, I don't know, it's about 200. And they're like, really? So Bob Budiansky got in touch with me and he said, well, I'll send you the list of 256 that I named. And it kind of went on from there, but I mean, there will be a limit to this thing. The limit for me is the Marvel Transformers universe stuff. which, I mean, the book itself is limited, and then there were others that appeared in the back of the comics. I was sent digital files by J.P. Bove of all that stuff, just as reference anyway, a long time ago. So that's going to be my target, plus a couple of others. I'm putting the Mega Ratch character in there, because that's one that, you know, I've kind of been involved with. And probably a few others, Emma and Zara, maybe, just ones that I was involved with. So don't ask me for stuff that isn't in. Anyway, that's going quite well. I think I've done about 27 so far. And so,
not many to go.
Bloody editors. So if you look at if you go to my blog address, which is andrewwildman.net, that links to my Patreon page. You don't have to sign up to Patreon, you don't have to pay me any money. You can just have a look and you can see most of the sketches that are coming up. Not all of them, but you can see most of them. And I'd love you to have a look, and I'd love you to comment, and I'd love you to ask the characters just so that I can say, no, I'm not going to do that one.
Impactor.
Yeah, see, you know. Like that, yeah, ask for that, and then I can say no, because I don't do Transformers anymore.
And is there going to be, once you've managed to do 300, 500?
Shut up with that.
I'm just saying. Are we going to be able to get the book?
The book? Yeah.
The book?
Yeah, well, the original idea was that I'll do all of these and then I'll publish them in a book, self-publish them in a book to sell at conventions. I'll probably release it in parts, just so that people could, you know, maybe 3 or 4 parts, whatever. Sell them at conventions, maybe sell them online, because we're kind of allowed to do that thing. It's not really legal, but they don't mind too much. So yeah, they will be available as a book. Yeah.
You had another question, didn't you?
I have. Just also wanted to ask if you could tell us a bit about the transition over to US Marvel when Bob Budiansky asked you to go over, I believe, and how that worked.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we got to meet, you know, Bob, you know, from being just a kind of name on a script that we used to see. Bob came over for one visit, and, you know, we actually kind of got to meet Bob, and that kind of smoothed lots of things, you know, once you actually get the face-to-face with somebody, and it helped the flow of information. And then the next time Bob came over, we went for lunch in Covent Garden, and he basically said, I'm leaving the book, do you want it? And, you know, at that point my dream was working for Marvel America, so, you know, of course I said yes. And then Bob qualified this by saying it'll probably be cancelled in 4 issues. So, you know, but I thought I'll take 4 issues of Marvel US work. And, you know, sort of to our credit, I guess, we got something like 25 issues out of it. So that was great. And, you know, and from going to work straight with Jose Delbo, who's a lovely guy, and, you know, that was great. I was very pleased when we started to get Jeff on the book, and then Andrew came on and took it on regularly. So it just kind of gradually, we just sort of took more of the reins of it, I guess. But yeah, it was just done very casually, really, before.
I mean, I was only going to be fill-in artist while Jeff went to do the Death Set graphic novel. So I was only going to do 4 issues. But it was like, wow, I'm going to work for Marvel US. So they asked me to do a sample page. Can you do a sample double-page spread? And they turned me down. I did these samples. I said, no, you're not good enough. I was like, what? Okay, fine. That was my one chance of blowing. And then they got Dwayne
Turner, who really wasn't into Transformers at all.
He's a great artist, but he just wasn't really suited to it.
But in a way, kind of his lack of interest helped us, because then when I went back to Don Daly, the editor, and said, now can we have Andrew? He just kind of, you know, caved at that point.
And the thing was that when I was briefed on doing the sample that I did to try and get the book, Don Daly said to me, we don't do Transformers here the way that you do it in the UK. So all that stuff that you draw in the UK with, you know, saliva and teeth and all that kind of organic stuff going on, don't do that. We don't do that. Make them look like robots, like Jose does, you know. So that's what I did, and they turned it down. So when they came back, they said, do what you like, don't really care. So that's when I started doing all the saliva and the teeth and all that kind of thing. And people seem to like it, so I just carried on doing that.
So what was your working relationship like? Simon, were you...
It's terrible, we hate it.
Yeah, we don't talk.
No. Were you,
Painful to be sitting there. So.
were you fully scripting the comics and giving them to Andrew, or were you just overviewing the story to Andrew, and Andrew was doing most of the story plotting in terms of the pages and things?
I mean, it was different in the UK because we worked full script, so they were quite, detailed, the scripts, and there wasn't much wiggle room for Andrew in them. I mean, I always look at it as a collaborative thing, and we always open the door to changes and whatever else. But full script is full script. It's kind of, those are the panels, those are the shots, that's where the dialogue goes. But when we started on the American comic, they worked Marvel plot style, which is just a kind of block of text which kind of tells the story with some idea of pages in it, and then Andrew does all the kind of breaking down.
Yeah, I think the full script thing works really well for Marvel UK because there are so few pages. I mean, you have 6 pages or something in an issue. So the writer, and certainly a writer like Simon, who's an editor as well, they can keep it really tight and get the maximum storytelling out of half a dozen pages. But because with the American books, they're 22 pages, so you've got the room for the writer to kind of plot it a bit more loosely, and then that as an artist, that's a joy because it gives you the opportunity to get so much more drama in there visually. It's a kind of hard thing to get used to when you've been working full script to work on a plot, but once you get used to it, it's definitely the more fulfilling way to work as an artist.
Okay, we've got a question at the back there.
Hi, you go on about your working relationship, and obviously you two have been working together for quite some time. If you can remember back, what were your first impressions of each other like? Were they favourable or negative, or
What, in a professional sense or a personal sense?
whatever's funniest and most honest?
I think pretty soon we became kind of friendly. I mean, more than just kind of an editor and an artist. I think we just got on really well on a personal level. And, I knew Andrew had kind of talent and I slightly used my editor's skills to try and kind of bring that out, I guess, a little more.
Bring it out, yeah. Nurture it. That was nurturing you, Simon. You were.
But I do think Andrew's progression kind of was very rapid. In terms of just kind of getting into the flow of kind of weekly comics or monthly comics, and yeah, I don't think we ever really looked back, and we still work together today.
Yeah, the thing about the Marvel UK office back then was that I didn't go into the office much, but the times that I did go in, it was a real fun place to be. There were a bunch of guys just having fun doing comics, it was incredible. So there was a nice kind of social atmosphere there anyway. We're all similar kind of age, interested in similar kind of stuff, same kind of movies, all that kind of thing. So I think everybody got on really well, but we just worked really well together. He's a tough editor. Seriously, but that has benefited me enormously. He didn't hold back when he would say to me, very deadpan way, well, this doesn't work and that doesn't work, and I really think you could do better, in what seemed like a quite patronising way. And I was, as a young artist, you think, oh, fuck you, But you just kind of suck it up, and you just think, no, I just need to do, I need to do what the editor's asking for. And B, it's an opportunity to learn from somebody who's been in comics longer than I have. And that's the way that you develop. And I think through that sort of cooperation, we just realised that we could get the best result for the product. And that's always the thing. It's a commercial thing, so you need to get the best result for the product.
My standard editorial technique was to go through all the good points, and generally it's like, oh, this is great, I love this scene, and then there would be a kind of pause, and then the but, and then, I would go through the stuff that I want to change. So, I was tough, on all artists who kind of worked for me on Transformers, and, I still will kind of argue the toss with Andrew or whoever on things. We had a little sort of shall I say, dialogue on issue 100 of Regeneration 1, you know, where, you know, I just kind of thought it could have been better, you know, and we talked about...
I don't know about this, let's spoil it for them. They think we live together or something.
But yeah, you know, it's always been a collaborative thing for me, so the closer I can kind of work and be in contact with the artist, the better.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
In Regeneration 85, there was a scene where Optimus had a vision of Unicron returning. Was there any plan of having Unicron during the Regeneration finale, or was that just like a red herring?
Yeah, we weren't going to bring a Unicron into it, but it just kind of was, we were trying to sort of include as much kind of pull from the old series as possible. And really it was just to kind of show Optimus Prime's state of mind at the time, which was troubled to say the least. And it was just kind of a general foreboding of something to happen. But, you know, did we kind of tease it and not deliver? Yeah, I reckon we did. But, you know, it was just nice to kind of pull that thread forwards from the old series.
I mean, it would have been wrong to do the whole series and not have Unicron in some form or another. So to have that as illustrated as some of Prime's mental anguish was just a perfect way to do it. This is nightmare.
What do you think about becoming IDW verse?
Well, as someone who kind of started current IDW-verse, I love it. You know? But I mean, to be honest, I think they're doing great stuff at the moment. I mean, you know, and I hope he's not listening, but particularly James Roberts, who's kind of taken the spirit of some of the kind of, you know, stuff I did in the original Asian series and kind of run with those and expanded on those and you know, he's done it in his own inimitable style. So yeah, I think there's some great stuff at the moment, really good.
I don't read any of it, I'm embarrassed to say, but clearly it's good. I mean, you can tell that by the reception that you guys give to certain people when they come up. So there's absolutely no doubt that James is doing an incredible job. So yeah.
James gets quite a rap for his body count, but really he isn't anywhere in either of your leagues in terms of just the amount of characters that you'd like to kill off. There's one story that you told many years ago at an auto assembly, and I don't know if you've talked about it recently, but for anybody who's new here, it made me howl with laughter. What was the story about the robot sheep?
Yeah, I'm sure I've told this story many times, but when we were kind of in our sort of run of American issues, and Rob Tokar was editing. Rob was a great guy, and he was sort of game for a sort of practical joke. And we were interested to know whether Hasbro were really paying attention much. They just seemed to kind of pass everything without comment. And you know, Transformers was waning, and I think their attention was elsewhere a bit. But we decided to test how much attention Hasbro were paying to the plots we were sending them by putting together a joke one for April Fool's Day. You know, and we made sure the memo was very clearly marked with 1st of the 4th or 4th of 4/1, whatever year it was. And we sent off a plot that was just ridiculous. It had, you know, Cup chasing giant robotic sheep around the ark, and they were packed with explosive, and he was after them in a kind of carnal way, and if he caught it, he was going to detonate the ark, and Galvatron was fighting a 20-foot nun, and you know, and it just went on like that, and in the end, there's just like everybody dies, and the next issue just says, oh, hang on, we don't know, everybody's dead, and we sent it off. And we heard nothing back from Hasbro, and we started to really worry about this, because we wondered whether, you know, they had a sense of humour, or whether we were all going to lose our jobs. And you know, and finally Rob sort of, you know, bit the bullet and called a guy called Vinny, who was one of the two guys who approved the stuff. And he asked him whether he'd, you know, read the treatment we'd sent. And Vinny said, yeah, we've got a couple of concerns. But, you know, I think, you know, and Rob kind of went on and on until they got that it was April the 1st and April Fools, and actually they loved it. They just thought, oh, you guys, you comics guys, you know. And they, you know, actually it kind of, if anything, it improved our relationship with Hasbro afterwards. But there were some nervy moments there where we just kind of, we could have overstepped the mark.
I think we need to draw that story. We need to write it.
Do you want to see that story?
Somewhere, I don't know if it's still online, but Rob Tokar did a little sort of trick that, I mean, he still had a copy of it but couldn't find it. But his memory was much better than mine of some of the details of that story. So I don't know whether it's still out there on the World Wide Web somewhere, but Rob did do a piece about this April Fool's Hasbro joke. So maybe it's still out there somewhere.
Right, we've got a question down here.
You both kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but when you first started doing the English-British storylines, what was the general reaction from the States? Did they accept it? Did they notice it? Did they care?
I think they almost barely noticed it at first. I mean, I think, you know, we sent them kind of plots, scripts, art, you know, anything we could, but generally we kind of just, you know, we took no feedback as good feedback and just went on our merry way with it. But generally I don't think they were that aware or that, you know, we were some strange little outpost colony thing in some small island that most of them had never visited. And I just don't think they really sort of kind of connected it to theirs at all. You know, Bob was aware of it, I knew that from talking to him later, but, you know, they generally just kind of, you know, I think it was just like, yeah, rubber stamp, yeah, you know, and I just don't think they were really aware of it at all. And even, you know, up to the point where, you know, I took over the American series, I still don't think the Americans were really cognizant of what we were doing.
I don't think Marvel generally as a company were interested. Certainly by the time I got into it, towards the end, they weren't particularly interested in the book anyway, because when I started working on the book, I thought, yeah, I'm working for Marvel US, this is amazing. So I went over to America to meet the editor and all that kind of thing, and Rob Tokar was showing me around the Marvel offices and introducing me to various other editors, saying, oh, this is Andrew Wildman, who's an artist from the UK, and they'd say, oh, what is it you're doing for us? I say Transformers, and more than a couple of editors said, do we still do that book? Like, they just weren't interested at all. It was just one of the end of a clutch of toy books that they've been doing, and they were just kind of running it down. So they made the decision that they didn't want to do toy books anymore. So G.I. Joe lasted longer, but essentially they didn't want to do those books anymore. Ha ha ha! We're all still here.
Okay, we've got a question just over at the back there.
Death's Head. Where did the inspiration come for Death's Head into bringing into the Transformers universe? And also, did you talk with a British accent?
Well, I mean, the inspiration for Death's Head was just mostly that the story he was in, Wanted Galvatron Dead or Alive, was a kind of homage to spaghetti westerns. It was a sort of robot, outer space spaghetti western, and every spaghetti western needs a bounty hunter, so, you know, we just dropped a bounty hunter character in, and really he was meant to be in a couple of issues, killed off, and that was the end of it. But when we saw Jeff's amazing visual for him, that was when we kind of made other wheels move to get him kind of, you know, copyrighted Marvel, and I added bits to his personality, and just generally we built him up into a much bigger character until he was kind of ready to make the move into his own book.
You've created Death's Head. It's me, Simon, here. You've created Death's Head, and we did have, when Buddy Edson started on the comics, a few crossovers with Marvel characters, Spider-Man for example. But really in the American room, you didn't, or in the UK room, you didn't really touch on any Marvel characters. Was that a deliberate choice? Was that something that would have been difficult to do, or?
I think possibly by the time I was writing the American comic, they had kind of shied away completely from that connections to the other Marvel universe. I think it was something they threw in to the original miniseries when it was only ever going to be an original miniseries, and they didn't really, think much beyond that. Or, I think Spider-Man was just a kind of bump sales argument, as you'd expect. And, they had a kind of throwaway reference to the Savage Land, and then really, they took Circuit Breaker out into Contest of Champions, I think it was, just so that she could be, or Secret Wars, I forget what it was, just so that she could be a Marvel character. But other than that, I think very quickly they steered entirely away from crossing it over into the Marvel universe. I think it was just one of those things they did and possibly didn't really think about at the time.
Okay, have we got, I've got a question down here.
Were you ever under pressure to write or draw new characters for toy lines? Or was it up to you when you introduced characters or developed characters?
I think again, by the time occasionally with the UK, we had to tie into a toy launch. It was worth our while because we used to get reciprocal advertising on the TV spots for whichever toy line it was, the headmasters or the new leaders, and we'd get a little sort of flash on the TV advert of the comic, which was worth its weight in gold really. So we were happy to kind of steer the storyline to have the headmasters maybe ahead of when they were originally, the special teams. So we would often do that. But generally Marvel didn't ask that much of the UK department, and that was more Bob's. Sadly he had to keep just churning the characters in. And by the time, I and we took over on the American comic, there weren't new toy lines to feed in. By then we'd reached Micromasters, and there weren't really subsequent, we put the Action Masters in, but we did it more, out of our own volition than Hasbro making a dictate of it. I just don't think they were as invested in the line and the comic at the time, so no, not really.
It doesn't really affect me. I just draw whatever was scripted, so I just that was already filtered through, it's just new characters. I never really saw them as toys because I never had any toys. I was too old to have, had them as toys. So to me, they were always just characters. So when like Action Masters, Grimlock or whatever, because in the toys they're really small, aren't they? I didn't even know that. To me, they were just a new character, and some of them really cool looking characters. So I was just interested in the narrative and the comics. So didn't know what was going on with the toys.
I've got a question over here.
When Transformers merged with Action Force, looking back at it, it seemed like it was maybe coming from outside. How did that merger go from your perspective?
It's a kind of a little UK tradition that comics that were cancelled got folded into other comics. It used to happen a lot in kind of, like Eagle and Tiger and Battle and something. They fold them in for a while, so they kept hold of the title and the license. And that was really what they did when Action Force finished its 50 issue or whatever it was run. We'd already done a little crossover story, so they were both Hasbro properties, so it seemed like a reasonable fit. And honestly, I never thought it was a great fit. Once we kind of tied the two comics together, because all we had to use were the American G.I. Joe stories, which never felt like an easy sort of fit with Transformers. I always liked it when we had another robot story or another licensed toy story or an Iron Man story, something that had some kind of resonance, however vague. But Action Force G.I. Joe never kind of felt the best fit to me.
Now, in an alternate universe somewhere, back then, the comic was actually Transformers and My Little Pony.
Right, Andrew, you've said, I think, a number of times that when you drew characters like Galvatron, you were thinking of Jack Nicholson and things like that. Am I right, or am I making that up?
Did I say that? That's good. Yeah, I said that.
Yeah. Oh well, okay, because that brings me on to the question, which is, you know, was that something you did regularly or quite clearly?
All the time. All the time. I probably did say that. I remember doing, I don't know whether it was for a convention or for something. Somebody asked me to do an illustration of Galvatron just as a fun piece to put in a convention book. I can't remember what it was. And it was a bit inappropriate actually, but I did a picture of Galvatron holding a toy doll by the legs, pulling it apart with this manic grin on his face. And that was a very Jack Nicholson grin, yeah, you know, thinking of the Joker and that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's one of the things I really enjoyed about Transformers was getting those, it sounds like it shouldn't work, but getting those human characteristics into Transformers characters. Because they weren't robots to me. I mean, they're not robots. I had this conversation on Facebook the other day, somebody was talking about, it's going to be a weekend full of robots. It's like, Transformers are not robots. Like, if you follow the definition of robots, they're not that, they're sentient beings. They just happen to be mechanically based sentient beings. But, so I always thought of them more as, yeah, as exactly that. They have emotion, and they do, there's a lot of emotion in there, and that's the stuff that I used to draw on. So to then channel human emotion and to use examples of actors. It's always useful to use actors as an example when you're portraying characters in comic books. Very often writers will refer to that. This character is like whatever, and they'll reference a movie star or whatever. So yeah, Jack Nicholson was probably, yeah.
And you used to put those little visual gags in, didn't you? Like you had sort of ladies and gents toilet doors and Unicron and things like that. So they had a little sort of male symbol and female symbol and then.
Yeah.
So yeah, you used to throw all that stuff in, didn't you?
There was one cover I did, I can't remember what it was, but there was like a top shot looking down a piece of whatever, a piece of environment, you know, Cybertronian environment, and there was a doorway at the bottom, and I think there was an empty milk bottle outside. But I mean, that's the thing, you know, you draw this stuff, and after a while you just, not that you're getting bored, but you just start to throw in little Easter eggs, you know, whatever. So yeah, I did put male and female symbols on uniform. Sorry if that upset anyone, but who knows, they might actually be on there somewhere.
Who's to say he doesn't have, you know, conveniences on him somewhere, you know?
It would make sense, wouldn't it? Right, okay, I think we've got time for one more question, if anybody's got one. Or if not,
there must be one.
Come on, this is the last chance. Who's going to have it?
There can be only one.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got...
Oh, there we go.
Hello? Sorry, I'm going to ask another one then. What was your reaction, Simon, to Andy's stuff? To, you know, the whole organic personality that was putting into the visuals? And did you have any sort of hesitance about putting it in there and that you might squash it and say, no, they are robots, stop, make them look like people?
No, I mean, if you look back at the UK comic, we had such a variety of styles and approaches to drawing robots. You know, you had Dan Reed's kind of wobbly robots that sort of just had no straight lines on them at all, really. But they kind of worked, and he had all these, you know, instead of having them transform, he used to do all this kind of Jack Kirby sort of cosmic fuzz around him as they, instead of a transformation. But, you know, we had you know, Jeff Anderson, who did draw them very robot-like. We had Will Simpson, who again didn't really want to be drawing robots, so they were again very organic. You know, and so honestly, with the UK comic, we were so open to styles and differences that, you know, Andrew's take on it was just another version of a different version of Transformers. So yeah, you know, I think we were just game for anything on the UK comic. We were just artists.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK stuff, I was just trying to over-render things. Certainly when I was inking them myself, I put quite a lot of inking in some of that stuff. I remember some images of Starscream I did, and I was really trying to get the detail. By the time I got to the US stuff, something I'd seen massively influenced me, and I thought, this is how to do it, and that was Barry Smith's Machine Man, so, you know, the cables on the floor and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of what I was doing was coming from that, you know, seeing liquid sort of leaking out from, well, bodily fluids, you know. So a lot, for me, a lot of it came from that. It just makes it more fun, you know.
Right, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen.
Can I just interrupt you?
Yes.
I'd just like to say one sort of final thing publicly. I would personally like to thank Simon for kind of bringing me in on Transformers all those years ago, because I fully know that without him really, you know, seeing that he thought that I could probably handle that job, certainly I wouldn't be here today, and it was a massive kickstart to my career. So Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together one more time for Mr. Simon Furman and Andrew Wildman.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the like button and leave us a comment below. Also, spare a moment to share this video on Twitter, Facebook, and all your social media pages. To get updates on all of our latest videos delivered straight to your inbox, subscribe now using the link on the screen.